Competency 5. The ESL teacher understands how to promote a student's literacy development in English. So for this competency, we're going to be looking at the reading and writing domains of language proficiency. Competency 5 descriptors include knowing the text and the ELPS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, and the English Language Proficiency Standards, and use those in designing instruction. Also, knowing the interrelatedness of the listening, speaking, reading, and writing domains, and using strategies to help develop literacy skills in English. Understands that English is an alphabetic language and applies strategies for developing phonological knowledge and skills. And then knows factors that affect students' reading comprehension and applies those effective strategies. Also helping students transfer literacy knowledge and skills from the first language to the second language. And then knowledge of individual differences and personal factors that affect literacy development, and factors that affect ELLs specifically that include maybe interrupted schooling, their literacy status in their first language, and then applies effective strategies to address those. So here we're going to be dealing, as I said, mainly with reading and writing. So literacy development, think about it this way. English language learners are doing twice the cognitive work of native speakers because while reading, they're acquiring new literacy concepts and skills, as well as attending to the sounds, meaning, and structures of new languages. So this is true in all content areas, but in reading or writing, they are particularly difficult because language is a big part of the skills, as well as knowing the language. The alphabetic principle is really just that a sequence of letters and written words represents a sequence of sounds or phoneme in spoken words. The key to learning to read is based in this in many languages. And we talked more about this in the competency 1 and 2, where we talked about language development and phonics and different skills like that. The alphabetic principle involves recognizing, naming, and producing the letters of the alphabet, using a letter sound knowledge and syllables to decode written language, and then using a variety of syllable strategies to read beginning reading text, and then also using the letter sound knowledge to move towards conventional spelling. So for those teachers that are the lower grade elementary teachers, this is fairly common. But if you happen to be a teacher who is a content teacher or upper grade levels, even language arts teachers, say at the upper elementary or even middle school or high school levels, they may not have done much work in really teaching children to learn to read initially. And so teaching an ELL to read in English involves some of those same things, particularly if the alphabet is different or the directionality of reading and so forth. So it is a struggle to for most teachers to teach students that are older than the normal age, developmental age of learning to read in English. So that's a consideration. Something else that's important would be word study strategies. Helping students have strategies so that they can learn words. We're not always going to be there to explain things to them, so they have to learn these strategies, as we all have, to be able to understand words that are unfamiliar. So some of these include identifying, blending together all letter sound correspondence in words, also recognizing high frequency and irregular words, using common spelling patterns, stressing letters that have pronunciations in English that actually differ from the student's home language. And that may take some time for you to understand those, but an example of that would be the letter B in Spanish, B as in boy, would have a V, like a V, like Victor, sound in Spanish. So when a student mispronounces a word in English, that could be the reason why. I said that backwards. The V in Victor is pronounced like B in boy. And what I meant to say is, so if they see a word like video, they may pronounce it as video with the B sound. So that's just one example of things that if we know that, we can point that out to our students. Here's another example. The H in English is a different sound than H in Spanish, because in Spanish, the H is silent. And then teaching student rules for decoding words that are not phonetically regular. For example, silent E in great and bin. Another important strategy would be to clarify pronunciation and meaning of all the words introduced. A lot of times students will come to you, especially older students, and they really just want to know how to pronounce something because they don't want to sound, mispronounce words and be embarrassed. But we want to make sure also that they know the meaning of the words. So practicing pronunciation with students is important. Also reviewing letters that are different, as we just said. How about short vowels? Okay, the vowel sounds are particularly difficult in English because we have so many. So giving students examples of words with these letters and sounds is very helpful. Also, with the letters that have different pronunciations or don't exist, the sounds that don't exist in a language, is critical that you then teach students how to position their mouths and tongues as they say these sounds. And we talked about this in competency, I want to say competency 1, where we talked about the articulation of sound. Where do we position parts of our mouth or tongue in order to make these sounds? So that's critical not only to learn the alphabet, but in learning to read words. Using structural clues such as compound words, base words, and inflections, and then knowing the knowledge of word order and context to support both pronunciation and confirm word meaning. Because word order, as we discovered in competency 1, is also known as syntax, and that can be critical and a difficult skill for these students. So some other early strategies, blending, making word walls, doing word search, teaching word families, teaching spelling patterns, also known as phonograms or rhymes. In the second language, literacy is very similar. Once a child knows how to read in their first language, then they don't need to learn to read again. They need to learn to read in English. So the more literacy they have in the first language, the easier it is for them to learn to read in their second language. And this is one of the reasons that Texas has bilingual programs, because it's easier for the student to learn to read in their native language. That's pretty common sense. But it also, in Spanish, goes beyond that, because Spanish is a orthographic language, meaning it is pronounced the way it looks. And so it's much easier to make the sounds and to learn to read in Spanish and then make that transfer to English, because English actually has a lot more sounds and the different vowel sounds and so forth. It's not orthographic, and therefore it's more difficult. But once some proficiency in English is achieved, then allowing students to read on their own with choice of what they read and time given for reading is very helpful. And an important point is that there's no reason to stop reading in the first language. As a matter of fact, it's beneficial that they continue, because the more they develop the first language, the more that is accessible to develop or transfer within the second language. Also, bilingualism is a good skill. It's beneficial both in work and cognitively. These students that are truly bilingual typically outperform monolingual students. So there's lots of benefits. And so on the test, you may see some questions that talk about the benefits of being bilingual. So with beginning EL2 readers, it's important to remember that it may not be possible to translate a specific word from one language to another, or that translation may result in misinformation. Okay? So we say tools in English, but there's not necessarily a word for tools. It's more that they have their own specific names in Spanish. A word specifying one concept in one language may specify several concepts in another. For example, the preposition en in Spanish means both in and on in English. Background knowledge and making connections. Making connections between new and known information is critical for all students. So what may be difficult about ELs is knowing what they already have. What is their background knowledge? So build through discussions, looking at pictures, objects, and connections with the students to make sure that you are making connections to their background knowledge, that although they may not have an experience that you're getting ready to delve into, they have some kind of experience that you can connect that to. One example might be if they have not been to a zoo, but they have lived on a farm, then they know something about animals and you can make a connection there. That's a very simplistic example, but it gives you the idea. All right, so once we know how to decode and pronounce words and even know what words mean, we still need fluency. How is fluency important? Because if you're not fluent, you use too much energy trying to focus on decoding the word and not on its meaning or the meaning of the text. So it really is just very difficult for a student that's not fluent to understand the comprehension or the passage because they are spending so much of their attention working on the individual words. So if you look at this slide, and you can read that, it's because you're a fluent reader. Because you don't need to really see the letters in exactly or even the spelling correct to be able to read a passage like this, because you don't read every letter by itself. You read the word as a whole, and you almost anticipate what the next words will be as you're reading, because you comprehend and you're using context clues and so forth. A reader who's not a fluent reader would have trouble with something like this because they're trying to decode the actual letters in a word and make sense of that. So how can we build fluency? Repetition, okay? Practice, oral reading, listening to reading, doing reader's theater, doing partner reading, doing purposeful reading, helping students to just get better at this. But the key thing is that students have to be able to decode before they can read fluently. What are some strategies for comprehension? Well, we have strategies for before reading, during reading, and after reading. The next few slides are some charts that you may like or you may use that just give you some of those strategies. As we said before, pre-reading strategies really activate prior knowledge. They also can set a purpose for reading. It's very helpful to tell students what to look for or what to pay attention to. It gives us a purpose for reading, and we're able to target that much more efficiently. So looking at visuals, maps, doing a scavenger hunt, vocabulary cards, anything that we can do to promote or make a purpose or assist students to get ready to read is helpful. Anticipation guide, that's something that we can use with students to ascertain what they do know about a topic. You can even use visuals and say, what do you think this story will be about given this visual? You can use this in content instruction as well. And the anticipation guide could have true or false statements, agree or disagree. And you visit that prior to reading, and then you revisit that after reading. So that would also be a post-reading strategy to see, did my opinion or my answers change as a result of the actual reading? Also, the KWL we talked about a little bit before. What I know, what I want to know, and what I learned is helpful. You would obviously complete the what I know part and maybe the what I want to learn, and then revisit that afterwards. After the reading occurs, in the post-reading, you would then say, this is what I learned. So just some different activities prior to reading. During reading, teaching students strategies while they're reading to help them comprehend could involve using graphic organizers, timelines, including graphs, two-column notes, sequencing. Thinking maps are something that comes to mind. Just different ways to organize your information. I guess other strategies would be highlighting, marking words we don't know, stopping to ask ourselves questions. All these different types of things, knowing what you're looking for. I'm looking here for the main idea, or maybe I'm looking for cause and effect, or I'm looking for characterization. There's many different things to be looking for in reading, but focusing that attention will be helpful for your student success. Also, there's some charts and different things that you can use to identify the information, whether this be in an English class or a content class. There's different ways to take notes. These are just some different examples. And then after reading, obviously checking for reading comprehension, although I definitely recommend doing that as we're reading as well. And then having the students then apply that knowledge or skill will solidify that and make it be internalized. And then elevating thinking, to higher levels. So here are some other things to do after reading. Revisiting the anticipation guide, maybe doing a storyboard, also formal assessments. We do have those as well. Here are those charts that I mentioned to you. I'm not going to spend much time, but you have those here for your purpose. Semantics and syntax. Basically, semantics and syntax have to do with making sense of text. When we discuss the meaning and interpretation of sentences and phrases, what do you think they meant by that? It's helpful to point out words we've encountered before, but also helping readers discover grammatical cues that indicate a relationship, such as a cause and effect, antecedents and consequences, comparison, contrast. Even something as simple as, when you get a letter, although this is probably dating me to say this, but it may say, it has come to our attention that, and rarely does something positive follow that. If you've ever gotten something in the mail, it's come to our attention that you've paid your electric bill 6 months on time. No, that's not normally what you would get. It may say it's come to our attention that you did not pay your electric bill in the last 2 months or something like that. But that's just something that ELs wouldn't know for sure because they don't receive letters in English. Or it may be if you have someone make a statement, but then they follow that with but, then we know that whatever they're going to say afterwards is something to contradict or to give a different perspective after that, So that's the type of things. Sometimes phrasal verbs are tricky for ELs too. For example, take up, take over, take on, take out. That's what we consider a verb that is in a phrase, may have different meanings. So those are important. So building strong readers involves automaticity, meaning they can read quickly and accurately, fluency, which is speed and accuracy, and prosody, And we don't often talk about that, but that's expression, appropriate phrasing, and attention to punctuation. So when someone reads and doesn't stop to pause for commas or to really stop for a period in a sentence or make an exclamation like, wow, an exclamation point, then you don't necessarily get the full meaning. So a person that reads with prosody would be someone like that does read audiobooks, and they have a very good way of reading things that helps you to understand and visualize. So prosody is only developed once you're a fluent reader. So in teaching writing, writing is obviously reciprocal. So every activity that we do with reading, there can be a writing component with that. We need to collaborate with students. We need to integrate writing instruction into all content areas. And they need lots of practices. So writing for a variety of purposes, having them generate ideas and topics for writing, as well as responding to things, organizing their writing. And there are a lot of graphic organizers that assist you in doing that, whether it be a sequencing chart or a plot map or various things, helping students understand how to organize their writing, incorporating editing skills, understanding that we all edit our writing, and we don't have to edit on the first draft. It's more important to get the information down and then look at it again, and encouraging students to conference both with the teacher and their peers, and then sharing and publishing their writing. That's really important, so that students take ownership in their work and pride, and we honor that. Journals are very effective with these students. It can be academic or a more social kind of journal. Sometimes the teacher may collect the journal just for participation, or it may be the type of journal that is not graded or is only graded for participation. It could be a science journal where they're keeping their knowledge in one organized place, or a math journal. There's just a lot of ways of using journals, and they're very effective for ELs. So making that connection, that reciprocal relationship between reading and writing, and providing the opportunity, and looking at different types of text structures and reading. Reading and writing is different depending on the content area. There's different types of reading that we do in science or social studies or math than what we do in language arts. And even in language arts, there's fictional text, there's expository text, there's poetry, there's drama, there's lots of different forms. And so every teacher is a reading teacher. Maybe not teaching students to read for the first time, but even your content teachers teach reading in their content. That's a particular type of reading. Literacy development in the second language is obviously best accelerated by making the connection to the first language. It involves teaching strategies. It involves understanding how to utilize those strategies both before, during, and after reading. And it certainly involves comprehension checks and ongoing assessment and monitoring. And the students have to learn to self-monitor as they're reading. And a lot of times we can do that through read-alouds. When a teacher reads something and stops to comment, they're doing their thinking aloud, and it's very helpful to model that type of reading. Your practice questions for competency 5 are number 5, 11, 27, 34, and 39. And be sure to answer the questions. And if you need to check the rationale, you have that document as well. Thank you.